Hi, dear listeners, and welcome back to Blush and Bloom, the podcast where we talk about women's health, self care, and everything in between. I'm your host, Gigi, founder of Asele, your space for cycle aware and preventive care. I'm really glad you're here with me on this journey to unpack women's health and highlight the incredible things being built in this space. So let's get into today's episode. All right. Hi, and thank you so much for joining me on the Blush and Bloom podcast. So, for people who are meeting you for the very first time, how do you introduce yourself and the work that you do?
Hi, Gigi. Yes, thank you so much for having me. I dare to call myself a healthcare strategist with over 15 years experience in healthcare management and recently become a founder and chief product officer of IslaFem, which is the AI-powered digital platform for adolescent girls to empower them with knowledge and intelligent tools at an early age to be able to advocate for their own health. So I always seek purpose in anything I do. And so I feel I'm really fortunate being in healthcare and being in healthcare in the last 15 years. In the last 6 years, I've grown great passion for women's health, and that's given me a great purpose and driven me to become a FemTech startup founder with IslaFem and develop my own product to try to bridge that gap and the gap in healthcare.
Awesome. So, you've worked across healthcare systems in the UK, in the UAE, and other places. So, how has this global perspective shaped how you see women's health and innovation?
I think it's very much given me the experience of an understanding that healthcare itself is addressing the same problems. It doesn't matter where you are. While its cultures very vary, the gaps in women's health is strikingly similar. The problem is exactly the same in London than in Dubai or New York or wherever you are. So women facing the same problem. So innovation must be very much focusing on the problem and not that much locally grounded, but taking the cultural differences into account.
Okay. Thank you so much for mentioning that. I agree 100% that it's important to include those cultural references into healthcare, how it's uh, provided across different places. So you've also talked about traditional healthcare and how people often struggle to provide holistic and patient-centered care. So what gaps do you see most clearly from your experiences so far?
I think that there's a traditional healthcare setting are really challenging to address the needs of the patient. Because I believe the traditional setting is very much overlooks the needs for personalized, context-aware support and care for patients. Giving you a really recent experience when I was with an international healthcare organization developing women's health strategy. I went out there, did my customer research, understanding the needs. And it's very much just like you highlighted, Gigi, that women needs and wants holistic approach. But traditional healthcare setting find it really challenging to implement that holistic approach. Even, multidisciplinary care programs has existed for many, many years, but it's quite challenging for traditional healthcare organizations to provide that unique holistic approach, personalized care. But, I know that it's being recognized. And healthcare organizations, I know that trying to change that and trying to become more personalized, but it doesn't come without challenges.
100%. Okay. So many women often prefer alternative or home-based care instead of going to a hospital. So how do you think FemTech can step in and support women with this preference?
I think it's FemTech plays a huge role here. With FemTech, we actually solve that problem and we meet that need. There are so many amazing FemTech companies out there that actually solving that problem. Hormone testing at home, or others like sexually transmitted disease testing at home. So we women are playing so many roles in our life. We are sometimes mothers, wives, building a career, daughters, sisters, and try to fit in all of these to go to a doctor. We always kind of under prioritize ourselves. So there's a huge demand to change that care provision, like diagnostic tools going to the home or office of a woman. There's a couple of great benefit of it is, yes, it's more convenient for them, but as well as it's giving them more privacy. and it's giving them a kind of a private, judgment-free space where they can do these tests, and so they feel more comfortable. So most likely this can improve clinical outcomes as well. On the fertility journey, I mean, how many visits we have to a doctor when we go to fertility treatment? I mean, that's extremely inconvenient and extremely stressful and not a great experience for women. What if we change that? And there's so many femtech companies out there focusing on this. So it plays a significant role to change the way we deliver care, or we not just focusing on care in a clinical setting, but at home.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective on that. And also, looking back at your career so far, are there any moments that pushed you towards building in this space? Like, why the push for more holistic, patient-centered care, and also how your experiences so far have influenced why you're building IslaFem?
So it's like what pushed me towards changing approach or innovate. Yes,
Yes.
it was. oh, I think it was a repeated frustration of experiencing myself and watching the traditional healthcare delivery models failing to meet the needs of women. I saw and experienced myself that I've been ignored. I was not heard, and my experience is completely undermined and misunderstood. So it took 20 years to somebody figure out that I have chronic fatigue disease. It's a regular visit to the doctor, but after a couple of years, you just give up and say, okay, this is me, this is how I build. I'm just going to be feeling fatigue all the time. It's okay to lose my hair here and there. That frustration, understanding that others, I'm not actually the only one going through this, but the majority of women going through this, that frustration is definitely pushed me towards there has to be a way. So the system isn't just slow, or it's just not prepared to listen and adapt. But we know all the statistics from the McKinsey report, don't we, in FemTech, that women go through 25% more time in ill health than men. Biology bases on men's biology, science takes men's biology and not really taking into the differences in the gender, like female biology is completely different. So that's really frustrating. And I really strongly believe that we cannot close this gap just to, okay, improve healthcare delivery in a traditional setting. It has to be creative, it has to be bold, and needs to be executed. So change has to happen, but I believe technology is there to help us to bridge that gap.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. And I recently learned about chronic fatigue.
Yes.
I heard it's how do you? I mean, you don't need to like share, but like, how do you manage? Because I hear it's very difficult to do anything. Like even it even affects sleep.
Yes. The thing is that you cannot just diagnose it with a blood test. Can't. Is that the doctor very much the consultant needs to hear what you're saying and start asking you all the questions. So, and when it's all aligned, then because of your answers, they can just say, yes, most likely you do have chronic fatigue disease, which I have not ever heard of until 2 years ago, when I managed to find a doctor who actually asked the right questions. So I always had the issue of extreme fatigue. When I exercise, after that, I had body aches and I could not exercise again. And I'm a really active person. I'm a runner. So, I dare to push myself sometimes, not now, but I used to push myself to do half marathons or 10Ks or trail running. But I always recognize when I run at the weekend that by Monday, I felt like I can't get out of bed because I had muscle pains, I had flu symptoms, I felt really fatigued. I have IBS, and that's part of the chronic fatigue disease symptoms. Do you have IBS? Is one of the questions. But really, it's not easy to diagnose, but this is where it comes in. Am I being heard? Is the consultant listening to me? Is the consultant asking the questions that he needs to ask? And, many times consultants themselves don't know about chronic fatigue disease. Historically, we always go like, oh, you're too stressed. You're under pressure at work. So we're being dismissed. And it's always down to mental health, isn't it? But there's so many women suffering the chronic fatigue disease or even autoimmune disease. 80% recently I read autoimmune disease is female. So it's a huge percentage, but we're just ignoring the symptoms because historically our pain has been undermined. It's the relief I got 2 years ago when somebody told me that I have chronic fatigue disease. It's like, my God, it's not me. It's not just me being weak, which is really terrible thoughts. And the person's head doesn't matter if it's female or male. I went through years that, what's wrong with me? Why am I so weak? And I am not. I'm a hard worker. I don't miss, I hardly miss days at work. But there are days that it's a struggle. And I'm not alone. And why did it take someone nearly 20 years to figure this out about me? And that's just not right, is it? Because it's systemic. Is you go like in the NHS, the doctors have 5-10 minute slots for you. There's no way they can
Yeah.
questions. So I understand that the NHS is overwhelmed. There's lots of patients, but unfortunately that leads into patients being undiagnosed, and there's actually growing the gap in healthcare, isn't it? Because we women usually have multiple symptoms, but they have to be put together. So once I go to the doctor about my IBS, the next time I go because I'm losing my hair, the next time I go because I'm really fatigued, but they don't put it all together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's really challenging. But we can solve this with technology, don't we? That's where innovation coming in. How can we solve that consultants actually getting all the information so they can make informed clinical decision? Not just they have limited time to ask the right question, but there's a system for them to actually gather all the information and giving them in one place and diagnose.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That must be a lot. Okay. So let's switch the questions a little bit to designing products for women. Often healthcare systems, they design for patients without actually talking to the patients. So how do you approach co-designing, or how can a founder who wants to build for women approach co-designing with the people they intend to build for?
Yes, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's how do you develop a service or a product when you don't understand the need for it? So it's that there's two different approach. One that you kind of come up with the solution first and then you test it, but then it's quite challenging. Or you actually find the problem first and then you design the solution. But finding the root cause of a problem, you need to engage with your users or the people, your customers that you would like to design something for. So it's deep understanding that problem, and without design thinking, it's really difficult. And I believe that design thinking is not a process; it's a tool, it's a mindset. So you listen first. So what we did with IslaFem and previously in my work, I always went to the customer, the user, to understand their problems and their need. Because if you design, most products fail because they're not needed. Even last week, I was on a conference and one of the panelists highlighted this. And on my MIT studies, we had a whole course about co-design. And that's all about why products fail, because there's no need for the product and it has not been identified. So with IslaFem, we don't do anything without our girls and families and consultants, because they are the ones who have the problem. So they need to co-design with us. So we talk to them. We call them Isla heroes. So we have our Isla teen heroes, who are the teenage girls, a couple of girls helping us. We interviewing them, we discussing them, we talking about the product, talking about solution, as well as the parents, as well as the consultants. So they are basically designing Isla with us. And I strongly believe that's the right approach. But, it's everybody have different opinion. But I very strongly believe in co-design.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. And also, I would like to get your perspective on asking people questions, because I learned that the best way for you to get what you're looking for, you don't want to introduce bias into the question. So you have to ask an open question, and then also realize that there was this quote about the person may think that they want about Henry Ford and a faster horse or something like that. So how are you able to ask the open questions that give you what you're looking for and then be able to translate them into features?
Yes, I think because you're going through multiple steps in the co-design process. So the initial step is an interview, but that's a formal conversation. So it's, as you highlighted very well, Gigi, there, it's open questions. So we don't give them ideas. We don't tell them that what the problem we feel it is. They tell you. it's really interesting that how I came up with the idea of Isla is while I was going through developing my women's health strategy, I interviewed women age 30 to 50 category. And it was really interesting that while I interviewed that segment of women, the ones who are moms to a daughter started to highlight the biggest worries for their daughter. So we actually never even went into that segment. But that made me recognize that there is an underserved market here from the parent's perspective or the girl's perspective. But it's really interesting when you just have a conversation, open questions, that what problems or worries or concerns of the user coming out. So when you're not guiding it, let's just have a chat. But of course, when they highlight something, you need to be able to guide the conversation a little bit. But then after that, after the interview, you have another session where you start to narrow it down a little bit and you start focusing on certain problems and how would they solve it. So it's not that what you tell them, it doesn't mean, as you highlighted that really good quote, I think even that it was it Apple? Yes, that highlighted that sometimes you come up with the solution because they don't know they need a solution. I think it's a mix of the two. You do have to listen to them, but you may come up with a better idea to solve the problem. And you have the right to do so because that's why you are a product developer, a product designer. You just really need to understand the problem. But then you have, you're testing the solution. And when you test the solution that they didn't give you and what's the reaction to that solution, which we're just going through the prototype testing. And it's absolutely brilliant what responses we get on our solutions. So yeah, you carry on listening, but you're absolutely right. The open questions and open dialogue with our potential users are really important.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on this. And okay, so let's talk a bit more about IslaFem. So you founded IslaFem to empower girls from their first period through to adulthood, which is super inspiring. So what was the motivation to focus on this particular age group? Because I was really intrigued when you decided to build for younger girls, because I think a lot of the women's health products that we have are targeted at adult women.
Yes, it's really interesting. So I a little bit went into how the idea came, but it was really interesting from the mom's perspective. What was the problem for the mom? It's when you're a mother to a daughter, which I am not. I have a son, but I have lots of friends who are mothers to their daughters, and they firstly highlight that I really worry about my daughter reading stuff on the internet. They go to Dr. Google or they try to learn about their health on TikTok. That's one of it. And then the other areas that, when we as women, our generation go through certain challenges in health, mental well-being, we just highlight, we just so much don't want our daughter to go through the same. So, that protective mother instinct that I wish there would be something that relaxes me, that I know that my daughter learning the right things, to get to know their body. So, but that's very initiated. But you can see that the adolescents, the digital health, so Gen Zs are completely underserved. So well-being and wellness apps very much designed for the older generation. FemTech very much focused from a reproductive age and now very much menopause, perimenopausal age. And I can understand why, because there's lots of problems there to solve. But that doesn't mean that we need to ignore, because the first health experiences shapes everything. These girls, there was 70% of or 80% of adult women with mental health issues experience mental health challenges at adolescence age. And 78% of mental health issues at adolescence age being unnoticed and untreated, because we should can't able to identify. But yes, there's lots of statistics behind it. When we're solving problems, it's great at a later age, and we have to do that. But what if actually we reshape the future? And how we can do that? That we're focusing on the next generation of women, which is now the adolescent girls. And our generation unable to advocate for their own health because we have not been told. We never really learned about it. It was taboo. We didn't talk about it. But what if these girls are actually have the knowledge about their body, about their mental well-being? Early stage, they start learning about coping mechanisms. So they actually able to advocate for their health and own their health, which our generation of women are unable to do that because we're not equipped. Of course, I'm not talking about everybody. Some women are out there that they are lucky for them, but majority of us don't. You know, we just don't know the symptoms. We don't know what is right and what is wrong. So many perimenopause and menopausal women suffering, and they think again there's something wrong with them, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's natural. So that's where I came from with my product. I just want the next generation to be different.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And you're doing such incredible work. And I love that you're also involving the girls in the platform. So I even wanted to ask about that. So how has it been like building for Gen Z and I think Gen Alpha? Because I understand that with building for younger generations, like as they are always making fun of Gen Z and Gen Alpha, that the attention span is not that great, it's low, and all these other things that you need to put in extra efforts to make it as catchy as possible. Otherwise, you won't pay attention. Like, is this actually true from your experience, or how's the development process looking?
Yes, 100%. You got it. You completely nailed it. It's with eyelight, the most important part is to understand Gen Zs because, I'm so far from Gen Zs, but, their behavior, their reactions, they're so knowledgeable on so many levels, but they still seek knowledge. They want to learn, but they want to learn their own way. They, it hence the reason that the UX, the user experience on our platform is nearly more important than coding. But I don't want to undermine the coding because the coding and AI empowerment is super important. But the experience that we create is extremely important and we cannot do it without them. So I have my Isla heroes, from age 12 to age 17, that's the focus now. And I have girls telling me that, okay, that's not right. I wouldn't do that. No, change that. That's no way. No, we need to engage a bit more. It's really interesting that what ideas they come up with. We always knew that it has to be really engaging. It has to be creating stickiness because we want them to come back on a daily basis. That's really difficult. So we're engaging them to tell us what we can do. How do we teach them that journaling is a daily activity and what's the benefit of doing that? So on a way, guiding their behavior, but rewarding them for it, making sure they come back and they complete their modules on the learning, and then we reward them for it. So there's lots of, without giving out too much, lots of gamification, engagement, stickiness creation, but this is all coming from our superheroes. And they are girls who are Gen Zs. So it's really important that they tell us what they want because we don't know. And they have been absolutely brilliant so far that what we can create. And there's so much more they will give us. We just did the prototype testing phase and we're testing their ideas. But how did we execute those ideas? And it's really interesting that how much they want to be in control. Following GDPR compliance, girls 16 and under, we want to make sure the parents consenting, but then we want the parents to be involved at that age because that's really important. And we have Isla or AI Bestie, who very much a chatbot, and the girls can talk to Isla, and Isla is really knowledgeable, and Isla is at the background trying to analyze all patterns so we can actually personalize the engagement with Isla. But it's really interesting to make sure that systemic thinking is there to not create another problem with a solution. And it's very important. And the girls coming up with great ideas not to do that, avoiding AI psychosis, making sure that they actually talk to a real person, not starting to make them only talk to Isla on their device. So we want to avoid that. So how do we do that? So there's loads of, yes, it's really important that these Gen Zs coming up with the ideas and they come up with absolutely brilliant ideas.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that because I was about to ask again about that because there have been several cases, as you know, with younger users interacting with AI and then it pushes them to do weird stuff. So I'm happy that you are also factoring this in your development of the AI chatbot and then putting in those guardrails so the girls don't Yeah. So,
It's really important, isn't it? Because now nearly every day you hear something negative about AI, and we always highlight. A couple of weeks ago, there was on BBC there was talking about AI psychosis, and
mm,
I fully appreciate and understand the concern around it. But if the solution is not allowing Gen Zs to use AI or engage with AI, I think that I disagree with the approach. I think the approach needs to be proactive and proactively creating platforms that they can, but safeguarding them because they will. We cannot stop them. My 9 years old son already is using ChatGPT for his homework. But how do we teach them to do it the right way? And how do we create environment that is safe for them to use it?
okay. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really love what you're building. This is really interesting stuff. Okay. So your app is planned to launch very soon. What's your vision for IslaFem in the next few years?
The vision is big. Vision is big, and our vision statement is empowering the next generation of women. And that's exactly what we would like to do. So with Isla, my vision is that globally is going to be the go-to platform for adolescent girls to actually get to know their body and able to protect their mind. So I really would like Isla to be a go-to platform. But on the other hand, we have in mind the other challenges in healthcare, and that's very much delay in diagnosis. I really would like Isla to become a digital platform where we can have preventative measures as well as probabilities of certain gynecological or mental health issues. So how are we building Isla for the future to making sure our clinical metrics are there and it's backed clinically, because we want it to become a clinical decision support system for consultants. So girls don't have to wait 10 years to identify or diagnose with endometriosis, because they will have enough data to show their consultants who can then make a more informed clinical decision in the future. So the future is very much going into a little bit into clinical. Right now, go-to platform for adolescents' well-being for girls.
I really love that. Another thing I really love about your platform is that you're teaching young girls patient advocacy from a very young age, which I think that's really going to serve them as they grow into adults. So thank you so much for sharing about IslaFem. And I really can't wait to see how the app is going to grow over time, because this is really cool.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you, Gigi.
All right. So I think the last time we met, we had a conversation about you doing some kind of product leadership course with MIT, and you were excited about sharing it. So are there any lessons you took from the course that you feel will be useful to other women who are building maybe in FemTech or even outside of FemTech?
Yes, I absolutely love MIT's Chief Product Officer program. Really enjoyed. This basically contains like 5 courses that you go through, and then you achieve your Chief Product Officer program. I think 2 of the courses I really, really enjoyed and very close to me is one of it is the leadership in innovation, and the second, which actually I would say that helped me really get Isla into reality. That was the design thinking, design X for digital products. And then you very much using the design thinking, going from ideation to product launch and what's in between. That was phenomenal. But that's very much reinforced that, yes, we have to understand the needs. So yes, I highly recommend. I'm not really advertising here, but MIT has been really eye-opening for me. And that design for scale and never lose the sight of human experience. So innovation always must serve real lives. So it's really important lessons.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that. And hopefully I can also check out the course, or I don't know if it's open or it's a closed course, but it sounds very interesting. So we are headed towards the end of the podcast recording. So I have a few questions for you left. So for someone who is listening and wants to build in FemTech, what advice would you give to the person when finding unmet needs like you're doing with Isla? And how can they design a system or a platform that is responsible and also carries the target audience along?
Yeah. What advice would I give? It's difficult, isn't it? Because everybody approaching it different. But I think that the commonality is what you just highlighted. Always start with empathy and
Mhm.
listen deeply, and then build responsibly. As you highlighted, it's listen, because if you don't listen, you don't understand the problem, and go and engage with the customers who actually have the problem. And one thing I would add to that is ask the questions that, am I building the right tool to solve the problem? And if I create a solution, could that cause a problem? And how do I avoid that? Because it's really interesting. That's again the systems thinking, isn't it? You could create a problem that could create a solution
Yeah,
that could
because
cause a problem in the future. So
yeah.
I would always ask these two questions. Am I
Mhm.
building the right tool to solve the problem? And if I have a solution, what problem that solution going to create?
Okay, that is a big question for me because I hadn't even considered. I mean, like from the AI perspective, it's a question that pops up every now and then because there's a lot of conversations around ethical AI and conversations about how people are using AI for in the wrongest ways possible. So
Mm.
it's interesting how to like think not just about AI, but as an entire platform, what could possibly go wrong here. So thank
Mm.
you so much for sharing that. I would think about that for Asele as well. Okay, so another question I have for you, which is basically my favorite question in the entire podcast, is what would you tell 15-year-old you?
Oh my God, it's such a difficult question, because you're asking me. So I'm as a 15-year-old, it's completely different than a girl today as a 15-year-old. What would I tell myself that actually relevant? I think it's well, there's so many things I would say, like, you're doing better than you think, because I know they always questioned my abilities. Age 15, you're going through all those changes and you always questioning yourself. Probably it never ends. It might feel impossible or really uncertain right now, but you're doing okay and your voice matters. And you might be sensitive or you might be overthinking, but that's actually a gift and not a flaw.
Mhm.
And one day you will look back and realize that you actually done very well, and whatever you do matters. Just find purpose in your life, and you matter always. I think that's it. It's just such a difficult question, isn't it? But I really hope I would advise that to anybody who's 15 years old, because we're always questioning ourselves, isn't it? But it's yeah, trust your instinct. That is so important. So
Mhm.
don't go against it, just trust your instinct. And this such an important little quote that it drives me nearly every day, that whatever meant for you will not miss you. So
Mhm.
whatever misses you, it wasn't meant for you. And please forgive me if I'm not able to say that who said this, but I listened to a podcast recently. And if you live that way, it's such an uplifting, energizing way to live, that it doesn't matter if it didn't happen, that wasn't meant to be. And yeah, at 15 years old, it's difficult to see these things.
Which is why I love asking this question because 15 is such a confusing age. I think your users also find this advice useful because adolescence and being a teenager is very confusing.
It is, and you feel like you're alone, and that nobody else feels the same way. And these are the things we're hearing from our superheroes and heroes, Isla heroes, that when we're talking to them, that they feel, and the emotional and mental well-being being highlighted more than the physical at
Mhm.
this age. So they
Yeah.
actually really struggling with the emotional change. And that's the thing, that yes, don't worry, it's gonna get better. All your things that you feel it's a flaw, it's not a flaw, it's actually a gift. Being sensitive, being overthinker or emotional, that's a gift, that's not a flaw.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay. And this is advice, I think it's advice that you carry on even beyond 15. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that. And final question I have for you is where is the best place for our listeners to connect with you, IslaFem, all the other work that you do?
Oh, I think IslaFem is, we have a landing page already, so it's islafem.com. I am on LinkedIn, so I'm happy to connect or just drop an email on the email that on the web page. But I would love to hear from anybody who's building for impact. because I'm meeting so many other inspirational women in tech, not just FemTech, but health tech and other tech. And yes, there's so many inspirations out there, and I'm so grateful that if I can meet those women, I can advise me or I can advise and mentor. So yes, I would love to hear from anybody who's building for impact.
All right. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. And I will leave the links to IslaFem, your LinkedIn page, and everything else in the show notes and in the description for the listeners. In the description, show notes. Yeah. So thank you. And thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Gigi. Thank you.
Hi again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Blush and Bloom. I'm so glad you joined me for this conversation. If you found it helpful, please share this episode with a friend or someone who might need it. Let's keep talking about women's health and working towards better outcomes for all of us. You can find more episodes and resources at www.asele.tech and check out our app at www.asele.health. And you can follow us for more updates on Instagram at asele.tech. Until next time, I'll see you in the next episode. Take care and bye-bye.